Hi Elm class, I'm back with another story from the collection A Necklace of Raindrops and Other Stories. This time I'm going to read you The Baker's Cat. I hope you enjoy. Once there was an old lady, Mrs. Jones, who lived with her cat, Mog. Mrs. Jones kept a baker's shop in a tiny little town at the bottom of a valley between two mountains. Every morning you could see Mrs. Jones's light twinkle out long before all the other houses in the town, because she got up very early to bake loaves and buns and jam tarts and Welsh cakes. First thing in the morning, Mrs. Jones lit a big fire. Then she made dough out of water and sugar and yeast, and then she put the dough into pans and set it in front of the fire to rise. Mog got up early too. He got up to catch mice. When he had chased all the mice out of the bakery, he wanted to sit in front of the warm fire. But Mrs. Jones wouldn't let him because of the loaves and buns there, rising in their pans. She said, "Don't sit on the buns, Mog." The buns were rising nicely. They were getting fine and big. That is what yeast does. It makes bread and buns and cakes swell up and get bigger and bigger. As Mog was not allowed to sit by the fire, he went to play in the sink. Most cats hate water, but Mog didn't. He loved it. He liked to sit by the tap, hitting the drops with his paws as they fell and getting water all over his whiskers. What did Mog look like? Well, his back and his sides and his legs down as far as where his socks would have come to, and his face and ears and his tail were all marmalade coloured. It's sort of an orangey colour, in case you don't like marmalade. His stomach and his waistcoat and his paws were white, and he had a white tassel at the tip of his tail, white fringes to his ears, and white whiskers. The water made his marmalade fur go almost fox colour, and his paws and waistcoat shining white clean. But Mrs. Jones said, "Mog, you're getting too excited. You're shaking water all over my pans of buns just when they're getting nice and big. Run along and play outside." Mog was affronted. What do you think affronted means? He's been told to go and play outside. I don't think that's very fair. Being kicked out of my bakery because of your buns. Affronted. That's a good word. He put his ears and tail down. When cats are pleased, they put their ears and tail up. And he went out. It was raining hard. What would be another word to describe how Mog is feeling? Grumpy? Cross? What do you think? A rushing rocky river ran through the middle of the town. Mog went and sat in the water and looked for fish, but there were no fish in that part of the river. Mog got wetter and wetter, but he didn't care. Presently he began to sneeze. Then Mrs. Jones opened her door and called, "Mog, I've put the buns in the oven. You can come in now and sit by the fire." Mog was so wet and shiny all over as if he'd been polished. As he sat by the fire, he sneezed 9 times. Mrs. Jones said, "Oh dear, Mog, are you catching a cold?" She dried him with a towel and gave him some warm milk with yeast in it. Yeast is quite good for people when they're feeling poorly. But what did the yeast do to the bread? Can you remember what that was doing? Making the bread rise up. I wonder. Then she left him sitting in front of the fire and began making jam tarts. When she had put the tarts in the oven, she went out shopping, taking her umbrella. But what do you think was happening to Mog? The yeast was making him rise. As he sat dozing in front of the lovely warm fire, he was growing bigger and bigger. First he grew as big as a sheep, then he grew as big as a donkey, then he grew as big as a cart horse, then he grew as big as a hippopotamus. Well, by now he was far too big for Mrs. Jones's little kitchen. But what might the problem be here? Can you think of a problem? He's inside the house. He's got so big. Yes, he was far too big to get through the door. He just burst the walls. Well, when Mrs. Jones came home with her shopping bag and her umbrella, she cried, "Mercy me, what is happening to my house?" The whole house was bulging. It was swaying. Huge whiskers were poking out of the kitchen window. A marmalade-coloured tail came out of the door. A white paw came out of one bedroom window, and an ear with a white fringe out of the other. "Morrow?" said Mog. He was waking up from his nap and trying to stretch. Then the whole house fell down. Oh dear. "Oh, Mog!" cried Mrs. Jones. "Look what you've done!" The people in the town were astonished when they saw what had happened. They gave Mrs. Jones the town hall to live in because they were so fond of her and her buns. Remember, she's the baker. She bakes that really nice bread. But they were not so sure about Mog. The mayor said, "Suppose he goes on growing and breaks our town hall? Suppose he turns fierce? It wouldn't be safe to have him in the town. He is too big." What do you think if you were in the town? Would you think it would be a good idea to keep Mog in the town hall? Or would you complain and say, "I don't think this is a very good idea at all. I think we need them to find somewhere else"? But where would they go? It's a bit of a problem. Mrs. Jones said, "Mog is a gentle cat. He wouldn't hurt anybody." "Well, we'll wait and see about that," said the mayor. "Suppose he sat down on someone. Suppose he was hungry. What will he eat? He'd better live outside the town, up on the mountain." So everybody shouted, "Shoo! Scram! Psst! Shoo!" And poor Mog was driven outside the town gates. It was still raining hard. Water was rushing down the mountains. Not that Mog cared. But poor Mrs. Jones was very sad. She began making a lot of new loaves and buns in the town hall, crying into them so much that the dough was too wet and very salty. Mog walked up the valley between the two mountains. By now he was bigger than an elephant, almost as big as a whale. When the sheep on the mountain saw him coming, they were scared to death and galloped away. But he took no notice of them. He was looking for fish in the river. He caught lots of fish. He was having a fine time. By now it had been raining for so long that Mog heard a loud, watery roar at the top of the valley. He saw a huge wall of water coming down towards him. The river was beginning to flood as more and more rainwater poured down into it off of the mountain. What's the problem if the river floods? Where's all this water going to end up if it comes down the mountain? Yeah, in the village. Oh dear. Mog thought, if I don't stop that water, all these fine fish will be washed away. What's Mog worried about? He's worried about his tummy. He hasn't thought about the village. But still, it's the same solution. He needs to stop the water. So he sat down plump in the middle of the valley and he spread himself out like a big fat cottage loaf. The water couldn't get by. Well, the people in the town heard the roar of the flood water and they were frightened. The mayor shouted, "Run up the mountains before the water gets to the town, or we shall all be drowned." So they all rushed up the mountains, some on one side of the town, some on the other. And what did they see then? Why, Mog sitting in the middle of the valley. Beyond him was a great lake. "Mrs. Jones," said the mayor, "can you make your cat stay there until we've built a dam across the valley to keep all the water back?" "Well, I will try," said Mrs. Jones. "He mostly sits still if he's tickled under his chin." So for 3 days everybody in the town took turns tickling Mog under his chin with hay rakes. He purred, purred and purred. His purring made big waves roll right across the lake of the floodwater. All this time the best builders were making a great dam across the valley. Do you know what a dam is? That's right, it's like a defence to stop the water from flowing. So, like a big barrier to protect the village from the town from the water. A dam. People brought Mog all sorts of nice things to eat too. Bowls of cream and condensed milk, liver and bacon, sardines, even chocolate. But he wasn't very hungry. He'd eaten so much fish. On the 3rd day, they finished the dam. The town was safe. Hooray! The mayor said, "I can now see that Mog is a gentle cat. He can live in the town hall with you, Mrs. Jones. Here is a badge for him to wear." And the badge was on a silver chain to go around his neck. It said, "Mog saved our town." So Mrs. Jones and Mog lived happily ever after in the town hall. If you should go to the little town of Carn Mog, you may see the policeman holding up the traffic while Mog walks through the streets on his way to catch fish in the lake for breakfast. His tail waves above the houses and his whiskers rattle against the upstairs windows. But people know he won't hurt them because he is a gentle cat. He loves to play in the lake, and sometimes he gets so wet that he sneezes. But Mrs. Jones is not going to give him any more yeast. He is quite big enough already. The end. Hope you enjoyed that, Elms. See you soon.